Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche organization with your daily video update for February 6th, 2023. Well, I'm sure you'll all be breathing easier knowing that President Biden ordered the U.S. Air Force to shoot down the Chinese weather balloon, which was apparently threatening the security of the United States. Now, military and intelligence experts will have an opportunity to examine the contents of what was in the balloon. And it's unlikely we'll get the truth because remember, these are the same intelligence operatives who came up with the conclusions that the Hunter Biden laptop emails was really nothing but an example of a textbook case of Russian disinformation. But the idea that a weather balloon is a threat. What about the massive surveillance operation run by the National Security Agency under the Patriot Act following the 9/11 attack, in which the intelligence agencies running the spy operation lied repeatedly that they were gathering intelligence on American citizens? This is something they denied for years. So the question of what is a real threat to our country should not be left in the hands of the intelligence agents who are engaged in spying on what you're doing, who you're talking to, what podcasts you listen to, and so on. Now, it's also interesting that this occurred as the drumbeat for war against China is increasing. It's being sounded by military, intelligence, politicians, congressmen, and others related to the military-industrial complex. They're basically saying that a war with China is inevitable, possibly as early as 2025. Now, keep in mind that this is something that's being designed to drive you to be diverted from the deeper crisis, the Ukraine war, the danger of nuclear war, and the inflation problem, the collapse of the economy, instead to create a different enemy that you have to be concerned about. Now, here's some of the other things to consider in looking at what's going on with this so-called Chinese weather balloon. The RAND Corporation, which historically has been used by the military-industrial complex to organize the direction of military and policy operations, played a role in 2019 with a report called Extending Russia. And this was a report which basically laid out a scenario for using Ukraine as a battering ram against Russia. Very much what actually occurred starting in 2021, 2022. That same RAND Corporation has just released a new report in January 2023 titled Avoiding a Long War, U.S. Policy and the Trajectory of the Russia-Ukraine Conflict. And this new report says that U.S. interests would be best served by avoiding a long war. And the implication here is clear, a war that the U.S. can't win. They say that the risks of this include a depletion of weapons, a breakup of the Western unity, but also the danger of nuclear war. At least they mention that. And they say that the U.S. should be looking for negotiations which can end the war. Well, I would say that this is a recognition that the war is unwinnable, and it's looking for a way out from a strategic standpoint. But what's their conclusion? The reason to avoid a long war is we're not prepared for the coming war with China. And so this idea of the drumbeat, the preparation, preparing the American people for being told we have to spend hundreds of billions to build up our military to confront the Chinese dragon in the Pacific. That's really what is going on here. Now, the real strategy for ending the war and creating a basis for lasting peace was presented at the Schiller Institute conference on February 4th, The Age of Reason or the Annihilation of Humanity. I trust that many of you had a chance to view at least a part of that, if not all of it. It was an extraordinary example, once again, of what we at the Schiller Institute can do to present a dialogue that gets us out of the constraints imposed by the lying media, the attempt to control the discussion, control the narrative, and so on. We had 25 speakers from 17 nations, including the Americas, including Asia, Europe, and Africa. It was opened by Helga Zepp-LaRouche, laying out a potential for a settlement based on replacing the unipolar order with a new strategic and development architecture based on the 10 principles which she drafted, and which we've appended before, and I'll append again at the bottom of today's description page. Essentially, these principles aim at overcoming the principles, or the policy, I should say, of oligarchism, of geopolitics, dividing people against each other, and are based instead on the idea that human creativity and love of mankind can overtake the efforts to pit us against each other into a war of each against all, a Hobbesian universe, a war of each against everyone. That's the oligarchical view. That's what geopolitics is about. That's what is the basis for these continuous wars that are being run, where you're convinced that someone else is going to come and take our freedom away from us, when in fact the freedoms are under attack from the censorship, from the lying, and from the operations being run by the oligarchy in the United States and Britain, with an emphasis on the role of the British in shaping this. Now, what Helga said is that you have a tyranny behind the concept of the rules-based order, instead of an alliance among sovereign nation states. Now, the speakers included a former president, ambassadors, intelligence analysts, peace activists, and clergy. There was also a discussion of the upcoming demonstration set for Washington, D.C. on February 19th, which included a leader of the Libertarian Party and other activists who were presenting the idea that we can unite a broad coalition around common interests of avoiding war and moving toward a development architecture which will guarantee peace. Now, it was also critically important that there were 3 representatives from Africa, from Uganda, from Mali, and from Zambia. And what they spoke about in particular was the end of the colonial era as representatives of the global South. That is, moving to policies of development based on cooperation, away from the control by the climate change ideologues and the neoliberal economic dogma, which is a new form of colonialism. So this kind of discussion is what should be going on every single day in the United States and in Western Europe and around the world, where representatives of nations who are committed to the development of the creativity of their people are allowed to have a discussion about what kinds of policies will benefit them, as opposed to what kind of tanks and missiles we can send to Ukraine to degrade Russia. If you have the common sense to see through the Chinese spy balloon drama, then take the time to watch the conference, and the link will be appended at the bottom of the description page. The doomsday clock may be ticking closer to midnight, but there's still time to defeat the war hawks and the neoliberals, and there's a growing coalition coming together internationally. Become a part of that and join us at the Schiller Institute to do that. Thanks for joining me today, and I'll be back again tomorrow.